was 17 when this all happened. It was my first real job, working at a local grocery store in our quiet Vermont town. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else and where nothing ever really happened. I liked the job at first. It was simple, and most of my coworkers were friendly. I quickly fell into a rhythm with the cashiers and some of the stock workers, especially during the slow hours when there weren't many customers. When that happened, we'd all gather near the front of the store, just chatting about random stuff like what we watched on TV, making fun of the older, quirkier employees, and complaining about customers, that sort of thing. It was one of the few times during my shifts where I felt like I wasn't just standing behind a register staring at a screen or a blank wall all day. Depending on who was the shift supervisor for the day, it would either be relaxed or more strict. Like if a younger supervisor was working, it would be more chill. People would be on their phones and people would socialize by the front. There was one coworker who I didn't know well at first, a guy named Sean. He was 24, a little awkward, the kind of guy who always seemed like he didn't quite know how to read social cues. He had longer hair, but kind of in the awkward in-between phase, like he was growing it out but didn't quite reach his shoulders yet. He worked in the dairy section, so we didn't interact much at work. He was quiet and polite enough, and I honestly didn't think much of him. Most people just nodded at him when they walked past, and he did the same. But eventually, I was added to a coworker group chat, and he was in it. I didn't think twice about it. It was just a chat for work stuff and dumb jokes, and it seems most of the younger employees were in there. But then Sean started messaging me directly. At first it was harmless. He asked about my shifts, whether I was covering certain days, things like that. But over the next few weeks, it became clear he was trying to get closer. He started asking questions about my personal life, like what music I liked, what I do after work, even little things like what I did over the weekend. Again, I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, people make small talk, right? But the tone was off. Sometimes he'd call me cute in ways that made me uncomfortable. Sometimes he'd make jokes that were slightly flirty. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he just didn't know how to behave with girls my age. That's another thing. I was only 17, he was decently older than me, and I don't think anyone else knew he was flirting with me like that. It didn't take long before the behavior became slightly annoying. He'd comment on things I posted online, and sometimes the messages were late at night. Not threatening, not really, but there was this persistence in him that made me uneasy. I didn't know how to tell him to back off without making it awkward at work, so I mostly ignored him. Don't shit where you eat, I always hear people say. One day, I was at home watching Stranger Things, my favorite show still to this day. I'd been catching up on the latest season, binge-watching episodes in my bedroom, just completely lost in the show. And then a couple days later at work, everyone was gathered at the front of the store chatting about TV shows. I was talking with a few of the cashiers about some random series, when Sean suddenly asked me, "You like Stranger Things, right?" I froze. I couldn't remember telling anyone at work about my show. I just nodded, trying to brush it off, but it left this cold feeling in my stomach. How did he know? I didn't say anything. I did make eye contact for a moment. He just smiled awkwardly and eventually left the front of the store back to the dairy section like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me more than I had realized. It wasn't until a few nights later that the fear really started. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep after a long day at work. The house was quiet, and then I heard a soft scraping noise against my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a branch brushing against the glass, but then I heard it again. A distinct sound of someone tapping on the window, just lightly enough for it to be unnerving. I got up and peeked through the blinds, half expecting to see Sean out there, but there was nothing. I tried to convince myself the sound was nothing to be alarmed about, but the thought of Sean's question at work, about Stranger Things, a show I hadn't told anyone about, it kept running through my head. A couple of days later, he texted me again. This time I didn't ignore it. I told him clearly and firmly that I wasn't interested. That was when things escalated. Almost immediately, he replied, "Okay, good luck changing your address." I couldn't believe it. In one insane text that he clearly sent before thinking of the repercussions, he proved my suspicions right. I saved the messages and took screenshots. I went straight to my manager and explained everything. My manager was shocked. He told me not to worry, that they'd handle it. I also went with my dad to the local police department to file a report, showing them the messages and explaining the incident with the window, explaining that I suspected Sean might be stalking me. The next day at work, Sean was called in by our boss. He didn't come back. It turned out he was fired on the spot, and the police started the paperwork for a restraining order. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, but I quickly realized that nothing really felt over. Even with the restraining order in place, if he was actually a crazy person, what's a piece of paper gonna do to stop him from coming back to the house and doing something crazy? I double-checked locks obsessively, refused to answer any calls or messages from unknown numbers, and avoided talking about my routines with anyone except family. The weeks dragged on like that. I would wake up at night convinced I heard something outside. I had to remind myself constantly that the restraining order was legally binding, that he couldn't come near me, but the fear was real. Eventually, as the weeks turned into months, the paranoia started to fade. There were no incidents, no attempts to contact me, no sudden appearances. The restraining order seemed to hold, and life slowly returned to normal. I got more comfortable going out alone, stopped checking my window obsessively before bed, and eventually, I stopped thinking about Sean altogether. It took a long time, though, for me to feel fully safe again. Even after moving on, the experience left a mark. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, cautious about new people I met, especially in situations where I felt isolated. I learned to trust my instincts and take any uncomfortable behavior seriously, no matter how small it seemed at first. Looking back, the thing that scares me most isn't that Sean might have actually harmed me. It's how quickly someone who seems normal, even awkward or harmless, can turn into a source of fear. It can start with small, seemingly innocent interactions, messages, questions, little comments, and escalate into something far more serious. Now, years later, I've moved past it. I work in a different town, live in a new apartment, and I don't think about that grocery store anymore. I don't talk to a single coworker from that job anymore. But the memory of those nights lying in bed, convinced someone was outside my window, it's not something that ever goes away entirely. It's a reminder of how quickly life can feel unsafe, even in a small, quiet town where nothing ever seems to happen. And while Sean never came close to doing anything physically, the psychological impact was enough to make me question how safe I ever truly was. So if you're ever at work and notice a coworker crossing a line, even subtly, take it seriously. Don't brush it off as awkwardness or harmless flirting. It might seem over the top at first, but it could save you from months of fear, or worse. Because sometimes, the danger isn't obvious. But eventually, I did move on. And now, years later, I can look back and say I survived. And that's enough.